The Russian astronomer was tall, slender, and blond, and his unlined face belied his 55 years, the last 10 of which had been spent building up the giant radio observatory on the far side of the moon, where 2,000 miles of solid rock would shield it from the electronic racket of Earth. "Why, Haywood," he said, shaking hands firmly. "It's a small universe. How are you and your charming children?" "We're fine," Floyd replied warmly, but with a slightly distracted air. "We often talk about the wonderful time you gave us last summer." He was sorry he could not sound more sincere. They really had enjoyed a week's vacation in Odessa with Dmitri during one of the Russians' visits to Earth. "And you, I suppose, you're on your way up?" Dmitri inquired. Yes. My flight leaves in half an hour," answered Floyd. "Do you know Mr. Miller?" The security officer had now approached, and was standing at a respectful distance, holding a plastic cup full of coffee. "Of course. But please, put that down, Mr. Miller. This is Dr. Floyd's last chance to have a civilized drink. Let's not waste it." "No, I insist." They followed Dmitri out of the main lounge into the observation section, and soon were sitting at a table under a dim light, watching the moving panorama of the stars. Space Station 1 revolved once a minute, and the centrifugal force generated by this slow spin produced an artificial gravity equal to the moon's. This, it had been discovered, was a good compromise between Earth gravity and no gravity at all. Moreover, it gave moonbound passengers a chance to become outside the almost invisible windows. Earth and stars marched in a silent procession. At the moment, this side of the station was tilted away from the sun. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to look out, for the lounge would have been blasted with light. Even as it was, the glare of the Earth, filling half the sky, drowned all but the brighter stars. But Earth was waning, as the station orbited toward the night side of the planet. In a few minutes, it would be a huge black disk, spangled with the lights of cities, and then the sky would belong to the stars. "Now," said Dmitri, after he had swiftly downed his first drink, and was toying with the second, "what's all this about an epidemic in the U.S. sector? I wanted to go there on this trip." "No, Professor," they told me. "We're very sorry, but there's a strict quarantine until further notice." I pulled all the strings I could. It was no use. "Now you tell me what's happening." Floyd groaned inwardly. "Here we go again," he said. "The sooner I'm on that shuttle, headed for the moon, the happier I'll be. Quarantine is purely a safety precaution," he said cautiously. "We're not even sure it's really necessary, but we don't believe in taking chances." "But what is the disease? What are the symptoms? Could it be extraterrestrial? Do you want any help from our medical services?" "I'm sorry, Dmitri. We've been asked not to say anything at the moment. Thanks for the offer, but we can handle the situation." Said Moisevich, obviously quite unconvinced. "Seems odd to me that you, an astronomer, should be sent up to the moon to look into an epidemic. I'm only an It's years since I did any real research. Now I'm a scientific expert. That means I know nothing about absolutely everything." "Then do you know what TMA1 means?" Miller seemed about to choke on his drink, but Floyd was made of sterner stuff. He looked his old friend straight in the eye and said calmly, "TMA1. What an odd expression. Where did you hear it?" "Never mind," retorted the Russian. "You can't fool me. But if you've run into something you can't handle, I hope you don't leave it until too late before you yell for help." Miller looked meaningfully at his watch. "Due to board in 5 minutes, Dr. Floyd," he said. "I think we'd better get moving." Though he knew that they still had a good 20 minutes, Floyd got up with haste. Too much haste, for he had forgotten the 1/6 of a gravity. He grabbed the table just in time to prevent a takeoff. "It was fine meeting you, Dmitri," he said, not quite accurately. Hope you have a good trip down to Earth. I'll give you a call as soon as I'm back." As they left the lounge and checked through the U.S. transit barrier, Floyd remarked, "Phew, that was close. Thanks for rescuing me." "You know, Doctor," said the security officer, "I hope he isn't right." "Right about what?" "About us running into something we can't handle." "That," Floyd answered with determination, "is what I intend to find out." 45 minutes later, the Ares LB lunar carrier pulled away from the station. There was none of the power and fury of a takeoff from Earth, only an almost inaudible far-off whistling as the low plasma jets blasted their electrified streams into space. The gentle push lasted for more than 15 minutes, and the mild acceleration would not have prevented anyone from moving around the cabin. But when it was over, the ship was no longer bound to Earth, as it had been while it still accompanied the station. It had broken the bonds of gravity and was now a free and independent planet, circling the sun in an orbit of its own. The cabin Floyd now had all to himself had been designed for 30 passengers. It was strange, and rather lonely, to see all the empty seats around him, and to have the undivided attention of the steward and stewardess, not to mention pilot, co-pilot, and 2 engineers. He doubted that any man in history had ever received such exclusive service, and it was most unlikely that anyone would do so in the future. He recalled the cynical remark of one of the less reputable pontiffs, "Now that we have the papacy, let us enjoy it." Well, he would enjoy this tip and the euphoria of weightlessness. With the loss of gravity, he had, at least for a while, shed most of his cares. Someone had once said that you could be terrified in space, but you could not be worried there. It was perfectly true. The stewards, it appeared, were determined to make him eat for the whole 25 hours of the trip, and he was continually fending off unwanted meals. Eating in zero gravity was no real problem, contrary to the dark forebodings of the early astronauts. He sat at an ordinary table, to which the plates were clipped, as aboard ship in a rough sea. All the courses had some element of stickiness, so that they would not take off and go wandering round the cabin. Thus, a chop would be glued to the plate by a thick sauce, and a salad kept under control by an adhesive dressing. With a little skill and care, there were few items that could not be tackled safely. The only things banned were hot soups and excessively crumbly pastries. Drinks, of course, were a different matter. All liquids simply had to be kept in plastic squeeze tubes. A whole generation of research by heroic but unsung volunteers had gone into the design of the washroom, and it was now considered to be more or less foolproof. Floyd investigated it soon after freefall had begun. He found himself in a little cubicle with all the fittings of an ordinary airline toilet, but illuminated with a red light that was very harsh and unpleasant to the eye. A notice printed in prominent letters announced, "Most important. For your own comfort, please read these instructions carefully." Floyd set down one, still tended to do so, even when weightless, and read the notice several times. When he was sure that there had been no modifications since his last trip, he pressed the start button. Close at hand, an electric motor began to whir, and Floyd felt himself moving. As the notice advised him to do, he closed his eyes and waited. After a minute, a bell chimed softly and he looked around. The light had now changed to a soothing pinkish white, but, more important, he was under gravity again. Only the faintest vibration revealed that it was a spurious gravity caused by the carousel-like spin of the whole toilet compartment. The light had now changed to a soothing pinkish white, but, more important, he was under gravity again. Only the faintest vibration revealed that it was a spurious gravity caused by the carousel-like spin of the whole toilet compartment. Floyd picked up a piece of soap and watched it drop in slow motion. He judged that the centrifugal force was about a quarter of a normal gravity, but that was quite enough. It would ensure that everything moved in the right direction, in the one place where this mattered most. He pressed the stop for exit button and closed his eyes. Again, weight slowly ebbed. As the rotation ceased, the bell gave a double chime, and the red warning light was back. The door was then locked in the right position to let him glide out into the cabin, where he adhered as quickly as possible to the carpet. He had long ago exhausted the novelty of weightlessness, and was grateful for the Velcro. Slippers then allowed him to walk almost normally. There was plenty to occupy his time, even if he did nothing but sit and read. When he tired of official reports and memoranda and minutes, he would plug his fool's capsized newspad into the ship's information circuit and scan the latest reports from Earth. One by one, he would conjure up the world's major electronic papers. He knew the codes of the more important ones by heart, and had no need to consult the list on the back of his pad. Switching to the display unit's short-term memory, he would hold the front page while he quickly searched the headlines and noted the items that interested him. Each had its own two-digit reference. When he punched that, the postage stamp-sized rectangle would expand until it neatly filled the screen and he could read it with comfort. When he had finished, he would flash back to the complete page and select a new subject for detailed examination. Floyd sometimes wondered if the newspad and the fantastic technology behind it was the last word in man's quest for perfect communications. Here he was, far out in space, speeding away from Earth at thousands of miles an hour, yet, in a few milliseconds, he could see the headlines of any newspaper he pleased. That very word newspaper, of course, was an anachronistic hangover into the age of electronics. The text was updated automatically on every hour. Even if one read only the English versions, one could spend an entire lifetime doing nothing but absorbing the ever-changing flow of information from the news satellites. It was hard to imagine how the system could be improved or made more convenient, but sooner or later, Floyd guessed, it would pass away, to be replaced by something as unimaginable as the newspad itself would have been to Caxton or Gutenberg. There was another thought which a scanning of those tiny electronic headlines often invoked. The more wonderful the means of communication, the more trivial, tawdry, or depressing its contents seemed to be. Accidents, crimes, natural and man-made, disasters, threats of conflict, gloomy editorials, these still seemed to be the main concern of the millions of words being sprayed into the ether. Yet Floyd also wondered if this was altogether a bad thing. The newspapers of Utopia, he had long ago decided, would be terribly dull. From time to time, the captain and the other members of the crew came into the cabin and exchanged a few words with him. They treated their distinguished passenger with awe and were doubtless burning with curiosity about his mission, but were too polite to ask any questions or even to drop any hints. Only the charming little stewardess seemed completely at ease in his presence. As Floyd quickly discovered, she came from Bali and had carried beyond the atmosphere some of the grace and mystery of that still largely unspoiled island. One of his strangest and most enchanting memories of the entire trip was her zero-gravity demonstration of some classical Balinese dance movements, with the lovely blue-green crescent of the waning earth as a backdrop. There was one sleep period when the main cabin lights were switched off and Floyd fastened down his arms and legs with the elastic sheets. That would prevent him from drifting away into space. It seemed a crude arrangement, but here in zero gravity, his unpadded couch was more comfortable than the most luxurious mattress on Earth. When he had strapped himself in, Floyd dozed off quickly enough, but woke up once in a drowsy, half-conscious condition, to be completely baffled by his strange surroundings. For a moment he thought that B was in the middle of some dimly lit Chinese lantern. The faint glow from the other cubicles around him gave that impression. Then he said to himself, firmly and successfully, "Go to sleep, boy. This is just an ordinary moon shuttle." When he awoke, the moon had swallowed up half the sky, and the braking maneuvers were about to begin. The wide arc of windows set in the curving wall of the passenger section now looked out onto the open sky, not the approaching globe, so he moved into the control cabin. Here, on the rearview TV screens, he could watch the final stages of the descent. The approaching lunar mountains were utterly unlike those of Earth. They lacked the dazzling caps of snow, the green, close-fitting garments of vegetation, the moving crowns of cloud. Nevertheless, the fierce contrasts of light and shadow gave them a strange beauty of their own. The laws of earthly aesthetics did not apply here. This world had been shaped and molded by other than terrestrial forces, operating over eons of time, unknown to the young verdant Earth, with its fleeting ice ages, its swiftly rising and falling seas, its mountain ranges dissolving like mists before the dawn. Here was aged inconceivable, but not death, for the moon had never lived until now. The descending ship was poised almost above the line dividing night from day, and directly below was a chaos of jagged shadows and brilliant, isolated peaks, catching the first light of the slow lunar dawn. That would be a fearful place to attempt a landing, even with all possible electronic aids. But they were slowly drifting away from it, toward the night side of the moon. Then Floyd saw, as his eyes grew more accustomed to the fainter illumination, that the night land was not wholly dark. It was aglow with a ghostly light, in which peaks and valleys and plains could be clearly seen. The Earth, a giant moon to the moon, was flooding the land below with its radiance. On the pilot's panel, lights flashed above. Radar screens, numbers came and went on computer displays, clocking off the distance of the approaching moon. They were still more than 1,000 miles away when weight returned as the jets began their gentle but steady deceleration. For ages, it seemed, the moon slowly expanded across the sky, the sun sank below the horizon, and at last a single giant crater filled the field of view. The shuttle was falling toward its central peaks, and suddenly Floyd noticed that near one of those peaks, a brilliant light was flashing with a regular rhythm. It might have been an airport beacon back on Earth, and he stared at it with a tightening of the throat. It was proof that men had established another foothold on the moon. Now the crater had expanded so much that its ramparts were slipping below the horizon, and the smaller craterlets that peppered its interior were beginning to disclose their real size. Some of these, tiny though they had seemed from far out in space, were miles across, and could have swallowed whole cities. Under its automatic controls, the shuttle was sliding down the starlit sky, toward that barren landscape glimmering in the light of the great gibbous Earth. Now a voice was calling somewhere above the whistle of the jets and the electronic beepings that came and went through the cabin. Clavius controlled to Special 14. You are coming in nicely. Please make manual check of landing gear. Lock, hydraulic pressure, shock pad inflation. The pilot pressed sundry switches, green lights flashed, and he called back, all manual checks completed. Landing gear, lock, hydraulic pressure, shock pad, okay confirmed, said the moon, and the descent continued wordlessly. Though there was still plenty of talking, it was all being done by machines, flashing binary impulses to one another at 1,000 times the rate their slow-thinking makers could communicate. Some of the mountain peaks were already towering above the shuttle. Now the ground was only a few thousand feet away, and the beacon light was a brilliant star, flashing steadily above a group of low buildings and odd vehicles. In the final stage of the descent, the jets seemed to be playing some strange tune. They pulsed on and off, making the last fine adjustments to the thrust. Abruptly, a swirling cloud of dust hid everything. The jets gave one final spurt, and the shuttle rocked very slightly, like a rowboat when a small wave goes by. It was some minutes before Floyd could really accept the silence that now enfolded him and the weak gravity that gripped his limbs. He had made, utterly without incident, and in little more than one day, the incredible journey of which men had dreamed for 2,000 years. After a normal routine flight, he had landed on the moon. Clavius, 150 miles in diameter, is the second largest crater on the visible face of the moon, and lies in the center of the southern highlands. It is very old. Ages of volcanism and bombardment from space have scarred its walls and pockmarked its floor. But since the last era of crater formation, when the debris from the asteroid belt was still battering the inner planets, it had known peace for 500 million years. Now there were new, strange stirrings on and below its surface. For here man was establishing his first permanent bridgehead on the moon. Clavius base could, in an emergency, be entirely self. All the necessities of life were produced from the local rocks, after they had been crushed, heated, and chemically processed. Hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, all these, and most of the other elements, could be found inside the moon, if one knew where to look for them. The base was a closed system, like a tiny working model of Earth itself, recycling all the chemicals of life. The atmosphere was purified in a vast hothouse, a large circular room buried just below the lunar surface, under blazing lamps by night, and filtered sunlight by day. Acres of stubby green plants grew in a warm, moist atmosphere. They were special mutations, designed for the express purpose of replenishing the air with oxygen and providing food as a byproduct. More food was produced by chemical processing systems and algae culture. Although the green scum circulating through yards of transparent plastic tubes would scarcely have appealed to a gourmet, the biochemists could convert it into chops and steaks. Only an expert could distinguish from the real thing. The 1,100 men and 600 women who made up the personnel of the base were all highly trained scientists, or technicians, carefully selected before they had left Earth. Though lunar living was now virtually free from the hardships, disadvantages, and occasional dangers of the early days, it was still psychologically demanding and not recommended for anyone suffering from claustrophobia, since it was expensive and time-consuming to cut a large underground base out of solid rock or compacted lava. The standard one-man living module was a room only about 6 feet wide, 10 feet long, and 8 feet high. Each room was attractively furnished and looked very much like a good motel suite, with convertible sofa, TV, small hi-fi set, and vision. Moreover, by a simple trick of interior decoration, the one unbroken wall could be converted by the flip of a switch into a convincing terrestrial landscape. There was a choice of 8 views. This touch of luxury was typical of the base, though it was sometimes hard to explain its necessity to the folk back on Earth. Every man and woman in Clavius had cost $100,000 in training and transport and housing. It was worth a little extra to maintain their peace of mind. This was not art for art's sake, but art for the sake of sanity. One of the attractions of life in the base and on the moon as a whole was undoubtedly the low gravity, which produced a sense of general well-being. However, this had its dangers, and it was several weeks before an emigrant from Earth could adapt to it. On the moon, the human body had to learn a whole new set of reflexes. It had, for the first time, to distinguish between mass and weight. A man who weighed 180 pounds on Earth might be delighted to discover that he weighed only 30 pounds on the moon. As long as he moved in a straight line at a uniform speed, he felt a wonderful sense of buoyancy. But as soon as he attempted to change course, to turn corners, or to stop suddenly, then he would find that his full 180 pounds of mass, or inertia, was still there. For that was fixed and unalterable, the same on Earth, moon, sun, or in free space, before one could be properly adapted to lunar living. Therefore, it was essential to learn that all objects were now 6 times as sluggish as their mere weight would suggest. It was a lesson usually driven home by numerous collisions and hard knocks, and old lunar hands kept their distance from newcomers until they were with its complex of workshops, offices, storerooms, computer center, generators, garage, kitchen, laboratories, and food processing plant. A Space was a miniature world in itself, and, ironically, many of the skills that had been used to build this underground empire had been developed during the half-century of the Cold War. Any man who had ever worked in a hardened missile site would have felt at home in Here on the moon were the same arts and hardware of underground living, and of protection against a hostile environment. But here they had been turned to the purposes of peace. After 10,000 years, man had at last found something as exciting as war. Unfortunately, not all nations had yet realized that fact. The mountains that had been so prominent just before landing had mysteriously disappeared, hidden from sight below the steeply curving lunar horizon. Around the spacecraft was a flat, gray plain, brilliantly lit by the slanting Earthlight, although the sky was, of course, completely black. Only the brighter stars and planets could be seen, unless the eyes were shaded from the surface glare. Several very odd vehicles were rolling up to the Ares LB spaceship: cranes, hoists, servicing trucks, some automatic, some operated by a driver in a small pressure cabin. Most of them moved on balloon tires, for this smooth, level plane posed no transportation difficulties. But one tanker rolled on the peculiar flex wheels, which had proved one of the best all-purpose ways of getting around on the moon. A series of flat plates arranged in a circle, each plate independently mounted and sprung. The had many of the advantages of the caterpillar track from which it had evolved. It would adapt its shape and diameter to the terrain over which it was moving, and, unlike a caterpillar track, would continue to function even if a few sections were missing. A small bus with an extension tube like a stubby elephant trunk was now nuzzling affectionately up against the spacecraft. A few seconds later, there were bangings and bumpings from outside, followed by the sound of hissing air as connections were made and pressure was equalized. The inner door of the airlock opened, and the welcoming delegation entered. It was led by Ralph Halverson, the administrator of the Southern Province, which meant not only the base, but also any exploring parties that operated from it. With him was his chief scientist, Dr. Roy Michaels, a grizzled little geophysicist, whom Floyd knew from previous visits, and half a dozen senior scientists and executives. They greeted him with respectful relief. From the administrator downward, it was obvious that they looked forward to a chance of unloading some of their worries. "Very pleased to have you with us, Dr. Floyd," said Halverson. "Did you have a good trip?" "Excellent," Floyd answered. "It couldn't have been better. The crew looked after me very well." He exchanged the usual small talk that courtesy demanded while the bus rolled away from the spacecraft. By unspoken agreement, no one mentioned the reason for his visit. After traveling 1,000 feet from the landing site, the bus came to a large sign which read, "Welcome to A Space U.S. Astronautical Engineering Course. 1994." It then dived into a cutting, which took it quickly below ground level. A massive door opened ahead, then closed behind them. This happened again, and yet a third time. When the last door had closed, there was a great roaring of air, and they were back in atmosphere once more, in the shirt-sleeve environment of the base. After a short walk through a tunnel packed with pipes and cables, and echoing hollowly with rhythmic thumpings and throbbings, they arrived in executive territory, and Floyd found himself back in the familiar environment of typewriters, office computers, girl assistants, wall charts, and ringing telephones. As they paused outside the door, labeled Administrator, Halvorsen said diplomatically, "Dr. Floyd and I will be along too. The briefing room in a couple of minutes." The others nodded, made agreeable sounds, and drifted off down the corridor. But before Halverson could usher Floyd into his office, there was an interruption. The door opened, and a small figure hurled itself at the administrator. "Daddy, you've been topside, and you promised to take me?" "Now, Diana," said Halvorsen, with exasperated tenderness, "I only said I'd take you if I could. But I've been very busy meeting Dr. Floyd. Shake hands with him. He's just come from Earth." The little girl, Floyd judged that she was about 8, extended a limp hand. Her face was vaguely familiar, and Floyd suddenly became aware that the administrator was looking at him with a quizzical smile. With a shock of recollection, he understood why. "I don't believe it," he exclaimed. "When I was here last, she was just a baby. She had her 4th birthday last week," Halverson answered proudly. "Children grow fast in this low gravity, but they don't age so quickly. They'll live longer than we do." Floyd stared in fascination at the self-assured little lady, noting the graceful carriage and the unusually delicate bone structure. "It's nice to meet you again, Diana," he said. Then something, perhaps sheer curiosity, perhaps politeness, impelled him to add, "Would you like to go to Earth?" Her eyes widened with astonishment. Then she shook her head. "It's a nasty place. You hurt yourself when you fall down. Besides, there are too many people." So here, Floyd told himself, is the first generation of the Spaceborn. There would be more of them in the years to come. Though there was sadness in this thought, there was also a great hope. When Earth was tamed and tranquil, and perhaps a little tired, there would still be scope for those who loved freedom, for the tough pioneers, the restless adventurers. But their tools would not be axe and gun and canoe and wagon. They would be nuclear power plant and plasma drive and hydroponic farm. The time was fast approaching when Earth, like all mothers, must say farewell to her children. With a mixture of threats and promises, Halverson managed to evict his determined offspring and led Floyd into the office. The administrator's suite was only about 15 feet square, but it managed to contain all the fittings and status symbols of the typical $50,000 a year head of a department. Signed photographs of important politicians, including the President of the United States and the Secretary General of the United Nations, adorned one wall, while signed photos of celebrated astronauts covered most of another. Floyd sank into a comfortable leather chair and was given a glass of sherry, courtesy of the Lunar Biochemical Labs. "How's it going, Ralph?" Floyd asked, sipping the drink with caution, then with approval. "Not too bad," Halvorsen replied. "However, there is something you'd better know about before you go in there." "What is it?" "Well, I suppose you could describe it as a morale problem," Halvorsen sighed. "Oh, it isn't serious yet, but it's getting there fast." "The news blackout," Floyd said flatly. "Right," Halvorsen replied. "My people are getting very steamed up about it. After all, most of them have families back on Earth. They probably believe they're all dead of moon plague." "I'm sorry about that," said Floyd, "but no one could think of a better cover story, and so far it's worked. By the way, I met Moisevich at the space station, and even he bought it. Well, that should make security happy. Not too happy, he'd heard of TMA-1. Rumors are beginning to leak out, but we just can't issue any statement until we know what the damn thing is and whether our Chinese friends are behind it. Dr. Michaels thinks he has the answer to that. He's dying to tell you." Floyd drained his glass. "And I'm dying to hear him. Let's go." The briefing took place in a large rectangular chamber that could hold 100 people with ease. It was equipped with the latest optical and electronic displays, and would have looked like a model conference room but for the numerous posters, pin-ups, notices, and amateur paintings, which indicated that it was also the center of the local cultural life. Floyd was particularly struck by a collection of signs, obviously assembled with loving care, which carried such messages as, "Please keep off the grass," No parking on even days. Defense. DF. UM. ER. To the beach. Cattle crossing. Soft shoulders. And do not feed the animals. If these were genuine, as they certainly appeared to be, their transportation from Earth had cost a small fortune. There was a touching defiance about them. On this hostile world, men could still joke about the things they had been forced to leave behind, and which their children would never miss. A crowd of 40 or 50 people was waiting for Floyd, and everyone rose politely as he entered behind the administrator. As he nodded at several familiar faces, Floyd whispered to Halverson, "I'd like to say a few words before the briefing." Floyd sat down in the front row, while the administrator ascended the rostrum and looked round his audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Halvorsen began, "I needn't tell you that this is a very important occasion. We are delighted to have Dr. Haywood Floyd with us. We all know him by reputation, and many of us are acquainted with him personally. He has just completed a special flight from Earth to be here, and before the briefing he has a few words for us. Dr. Floyd." Floyd walked to the rostrum amid a sprinkling of polite applause, surveyed the audience with a smile, and said, "Thank you. I only want to say this. The President has asked me to convey his appreciation of your outstanding work, which we hope the world will soon be able to recognize. I'm quite aware," he continued carefully, "that some of you, perhaps most of you, are anxious that the present veil of secrecy be withdrawn. You would not be scientists if you thought otherwise." He caught a glimpse of Dr. Michaels, whose face was creased in a slight frown, which brought out a long scar down his right cheek, presumably the aftermath of some accident in space. The geologist, he was well aware, had been protesting vigorously against what he called this cops and robbers nonsense. "But I would remind you," Floyd continued, "that this is a quite extraordinary situation. We must be absolutely sure of our own facts. If we make errors now, there may be no second chance. So, please be patient a little longer. Those are also the wishes of the President. That's all I have to say. Now, I'm ready for your report." He walked back to his seat. The administrator said, "Thank you very much, Dr. Floyd," and nodded, rather brusquely, to his chief scientist. "On cue, Dr." Michaels walked up to the rostrum, and the lights faded out. A photograph of the moon flashed onto the screen. At the very center of the disk was a brilliant white crater ring, from which a striking pattern of rays fanned out. It looked exactly as if someone had hurled a bag of flour at the face of the moon, and it had spattered out in all directions. "This is Tycho," said Michaels, pointing to the central crater. On this vertical photograph, Tycho is even more conspicuous than when seen from Earth. Then it's rather near the edge of the moon. But observed from this viewpoint, looking straight down from 1,000 miles up, you'll see how it dominates an entire hemisphere. He let Floyd absorb this unfamiliar view of a familiar object, then continued, "During the past year, we have been conducting a magnetic survey of the region from a low-level satellite. It was completed only last month, and this is the result. The map that started all the trouble." The briefing took place in a large rectangular chamber that could hold 100 people with ease. It was equipped with the latest optical and electronic displays, and would have looked like a model conference room but for the numerous posters, pin-ups, notices, and amateur paintings, which indicated that it was also the center of the local cultural life. Floyd was particularly struck by a collection of signs, obviously assembled with loving care, which carried such messages as, "Please, keep off the grass. No parking on even days. Defense. DF. UM. ER. To the beach. Cattle crossing. Soft shoulders, and do not feed the animals." If these were genuine, as they certainly appeared to be, their transportation from Earth had cost a small fortune. There was a touching defiance about them. On this hostile world, men could still joke about the things they had been forced to leave behind, and which their children would never miss. A crowd of 40 or 50 people was waiting for Floyd, and everyone rose politely as he entered behind the administrator. As he nodded at several familiar faces, Floyd whispered to Halvorsen, "I'd like to say a few words before the briefing." Floyd sat down in the front row, while the administrator ascended the rostrum and looked round his audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Halvorsen began, "I needn't tell you that this is a very important occasion. We are delighted to have Dr. Heywood Floyd with us. We all know him by reputation, and many of us are acquainted with him personally. He has just completed a special flight from Earth to be here, and before the briefing he has a few words for us." Dr. Floyd walked to the rostrum amid a sprinkling of polite applause, surveyed the audience with a smile, and said, "Thank you. I only want to say this. The President has asked me to convey his appreciation of your outstanding work, which we hope the world will soon be able to recognize. I'm quite aware," he continued carefully, "that some of you, perhaps most of you, are anxious that the present veil of secrecy be withdrawn. You would not be scientists if you thought otherwise." He caught a glimpse of Dr. Michaels, whose face was creased in a slight frown which brought out a long scar down his right cheek, presumably the aftermath of some accident in space. The geologist, he was well aware, had been protesting vigorously against what he called this cops and robbers nonsense. "But I would remind you," Floyd continued, "that this is a quite extraordinary situation. We must be absolutely sure of our own facts. If we make errors now, there may be no second chance, so please be patient a little longer. Those are also the wishes of the President. That's all I have to say. Now, I'm ready for your report." He walked back to his seat. The administrator said, "Thank you very much, Dr. Floyd," and nodded, rather brusquely, to his chief scientist. On cue, Dr. Michaels walked up to the rostrum, and the lights faded out. A photograph of the moon flashed onto the screen. At the very center of the disk was a brilliant white crater ring, from which a striking pattern of rays fanned out. It looked exactly as if someone had hurled a bag of flour at the face of the moon, and it had spattered out in all directions. "This is Tycho," said Michaels, pointing to the central crater. "On this vertical photograph Tycho is even more conspicuous than when seen from Earth. Then it's rather near the edge of the moon, but observed from this viewpoint, looking straight down from 1,000 miles up, you'll see how it dominates an entire hemisphere." He let Floyd absorb this unfamiliar view of a familiar object, then continued, "During the past year we have been conducting a magnetic survey of the region from a low-level satellite." Another picture flashed on the screen. It looked like a contour map, though it showed magnetic intensity, not heights above sea level. For the most part, the lines were roughly parallel and spaced well apart. But in one corner of the map, they became suddenly packed together to form a series of concentric circles, like a drawing of a knothole in a piece of wood. Even to an untrained eye, it was obvious that something peculiar had happened to the moon's magnetic field in this region, and in large letters across the bottom of the map were the words. Stamped on the top right was classified. At first we thought it might be an outcrop of magnetic rock, but all the geological evidence was against it, and not even a big nickel-iron meteorite could produce a field as intense as this. So we decided to have a look. The first party discovered nothing, just the usual level terrain, buried beneath a very thin layer of mutas. They sank a drill in the exact center of the magnetic field to get a core sample for study. 20 feet down, the drill stopped. So the survey party started to dig. Not an easy job in spacesuits, as I can assure you. What they found brought them back to base in a hurry. We sent out a bigger team, with better equipment. They excavated for 2 weeks, with the result you know. The darkened assembly room became suddenly hushed and expectant as the picture on the screen changed. Though everyone had seen it many times, there was not a person who failed to crane forward as if hoping to find new details. On Earth and Moon, less than 100 people had so far been allowed to set eyes on this photograph. It showed a man in a bright red and yellow spacesuit standing at the bottom of an excavation and supporting a surveyor's rod marked off in tenths of a meter. It was obviously a night shot and might have been taken anywhere on the Moon or Mars, but until now, no planet had ever produced a scene like this. The object before which the spacesuited man was posing was a vertical slab of jet black material, about 10 feet high and 5 feet wide. It reminded Floyd, somewhat ominously, of a giant tombstone, perfectly sharp-edged and symmetrical. It was so black it seemed to have swallowed up the light falling upon it. There was no surface detail at all. It was impossible to tell whether it was made of stone, or metal, or plastic, or some material altogether unknown to man. TMA1, Dr. Michaels declared, almost reverently. It looks brand new, doesn't it? I can hardly blame those who thought it was just a few years old, and tried to connect it with the third Chinese expedition, back in '98. But I never believed that, and now we've been able to date it positively, from local geological evidence. My colleagues and I, Dr. Floyd, will stake our reputations on this. TMAL has nothing to do with the Chinese. Indeed, it has nothing to do with the human race, for when it was buried, there were no humans. You see, it is approximately 3 million years old. What you are now looking at is the first evidence of intelligent life beyond the Earth.